I feel like one of the main reasons I've grown so cynical towards remakes is the state of games preservation at the moment. With a widespread lack of backwards compatibility for both digital and physical media restricting which vintage titles we can play, alongside the distributors themselves acting like older games are just a load of garbage in their original state, it's easy for me to get a bit cynical when they start retooling old titles and reselling them to us at top dollar with across-the-board changes. While you can go to any high street store and buy a decades-old film or album, the iterative proprietary nature of consoles makes picking up anything too old in our medium a little more tricky. That's why in theory I don't have too much against HD remasters. They serve as the equivalent to me of a good Blu-ray re-release, keeping the original work as intact as possible, while boosting things like resolution, frame rates, maybe speeding up loading times, stuff the original devs probably would have wanted if they could have on these games' original platforms. Plus, in some cases, they allow us Europeans to finally play some games at their intended 60Hz frequency. And while it's still possible to mess them up beyond belief, at least usually they're a way of getting old games into new hands without messing with them. Until of course the next generation comes around and they become incompatible and obsolete again. But still, here they are on shelves, classics in their original form, mostly unbesmirched. That's why when I look at something like the Crash Insane Trilogy, I kind of have mixed feelings. It's a pretty faithful re-release of the original Naughty Dog platformer trilogy in a lot of regards, kind of akin to an HD collection port release. But on the other hand, it's also seeing fit to revamp the OG releases with remixed aesthetics and graphics. Is it an unnecessary retooling of some beloved classics, or is it the re-emergence of the Bandicoot we've all been waiting for? Well, the answer lies somewhere in the middle. You may have heard I had a couple of negative choice words to say about the Ratchet & Clank PS4 remake, which while keeping a bit of the original's level design, decided to change the gameplay, the story, the tone, the visuals, the dialogue, remove half the content. Unlike that game, Insane Trilogy tries to stay pretty true to the original games in terms of structure and gameplay. To a surprising degree, I was actually taken aback as to how faithful each game is to its original control feel. I felt a significant upgrade in the precision of the controls when I switched from Crash 1 to Crash 2, much like how it was with the OG releases. It feels like Crash, lacking any ham-fisted attempts to update the gameplay or rubber band what is otherwise a satisfying challenge of a platformer trilogy. And that's good, because you know if this was a Nintendo re-release there would be some kind of super guide super mode where you get infinite Aku Aku masks or some shit. A few bits of geometry were striking me as a bit weird though, like I don't remember having to slide jump quite this much in the later two games to get by, but otherwise bish bash boosh, Crash is here, baby! Additions are kept fairly tasteful. Time trial modes that were added in Crash 3 are now present in the first two games, and that doesn't seem out of order. I'm sure Naughty Dog would have done the same if they had come up with that idea sooner, but let's get back to that HD collection comparison. Because while Insane Trilogy adds a bunch of stuff and tries to supercharge the visuals, it actually lacks a lot of updates that make for a good HD re-release. Does it improve the frame rate? No. Does it improve loading times? Absolutely not. In fact, this is probably one of the biggest things going against it. Loading that was seconds on PS1 is now painfully longer with these gross, empty, placeholder-looking ass screens. The frame rate is still 30, but at least that isn't a downgrade from 60 like with Ratchet. But at this point in time, could we really not smooth Crash up a bit? I mean, Activision and Sony released a trailer where the games were at 60, and then they released the game and they're not? So, is there really too much reason to get Insane Trilogy over the originals? Unless you really want some time trials. Well, what about those graphics, man? When I look at something like the new visuals on Insane Trilogy, I don't really go, wow, better, I go, wow, different. Both styles were made at the peak of their respective era's technology, they'll both be outdated at some point, they both represent different milestones in their time. Jaggy, poly, 32-bit graphics, they have their own artistry to them, the same way pixel art or something does. And I can see the merit and beauty in both this old style and the new style. The big difference though is that one visual style was created specifically to bring to life an original vision, while the other is just trying to make an already existing vision look more technologically impressive to convince people to buy a game they might already own again. And in doing so, there's no way to completely recreate the exact same mood and feel that the original intended, or perhaps didn't intend but nonetheless ended up forming the OG classic we fell in love with. You can't re-roll the dice when you start changing assets and textures and colors and land on the same weird perfect formula. That's why I can't look at Insane Trilogy's visuals and go, better! Even if ever so slightly, it's a different interpretation of what looks good for Crash. And in theory, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Perhaps there is something unnecessary about it. I just can't bring myself to call it an objective upgrade. Sometimes remakes can deliver something really interesting with this approach. When Mikami redirected the original Resident Evil with souped-up visuals, the atmosphere of the game was different, but there was something to be said about how much spookier it got. Insane's visual change, though, I don't feel really adds any tangible benefit to the experience, and in some cases I think it's actually a bit of a detriment to the vibe of the original. I could sit here talking about bits of lighting and shading and color that changed the feel of the game, the dark moodiness of some areas now being undercut by the need for super bright, bloomy, buy this game visuals, but I think there'll be loads of people doing that and giving exact detailed comparisons. Like, that's pretty much all the Crash videos on YouTube right now. I'll just say that, the new look doesn't do a terrible lot for me. Wow, that sentiment was totally worth the last 3 paragraphs of elaborating, Charlie. You can't perfectly recreate a classic if you decide to alter how it looked to this degree. And I can just go play the originals with the added bonus of shorter loading times. But in this case, I do see the value in having Insane Trilogy around. 3D platformers aren't really a super big genre at the moment, and while I think the idea that kids need super high quality mega graphics to enjoy a game is kind of baloney, I think the Minecraft and Five Nights at Freddy's sections in your local Forbidden Planet attest to that. Trying to pump these games out again as faithfully as possible with some added modern graphical flair to give the new kids on the block a taste of Crash, while I can't really knock that entirely. Something to consider to perhaps preserve these old games better, and something that would stop wankos like me getting so anal about changes to the vision and all that stuff in remakes, is when rights permitting to just include the original with the remake. Actually, this should be done by law. Metroid Zero Mission did that and it was great. Halo Anniversary even let you switch back on the fly, which is probably as good as it gets. But regardless of that, at least the kiddos with Insane Trilogy are still like getting these games pretty much fully intact as games here anyway. They're not dumbed down for complete little babies.
Try as he might, Ratchet could not breathe underwater.
It's not some horrible reinterpretation bastardized on every level, so they're getting something of value here. So why then do I have a problem with stuff like the Shadow of the Colossus remake, which is also pretty one-to-one structure-wise? Aside from the fact that I think the new realistic visuals are kinda clashing with the PS2 models the developers are trying to stay faithful to, Shadow of the Colossus is like this dark, mature experience with like grown-up themes, a haunting fairy tale from back when big-budget art games were still games. So I feel like if you're an adult and you need this Picasso over here to be rubbed down and drawn in again or shiny, you may not be in this one for the right reasons. And maybe you need to get your priorities a little straightened out. Although from the looks of things, the new meme on the block, in some online reviews, even the adults are struggling with Crash now. Which is weird, because if anything there are a few tiny tweaks in here that if anything make the game a bit easier. You don't need to beat levels without dying in Crash 1 to get the gem, you got these little hints telling you what to do. I mean, yeah, honestly, I don't know how I figured out as a kid how to get the blue gem in Crash 2 in the original, but I did, without help, so I want everyone to suffer like I did. But honestly, it's the fact that fully grown professional video game reviewers are struggling to beat a game I did when I was like 6 that makes me the happiest Insane Trilogy is a thing. Because I think giving the kids today a taste of a fun challenge like the one Crash offers and the satisfaction that comes with it will do wonders in molding the connoisseurs of the future. Hey gang, thanks for watching. This video was intended to be up like a week ago, but basically every computer I have died at the same time, so this got a little pushed back. If it wasn't for my Patreons who are currently backing the show, I probably wouldn't have been able to get things back up and running as quickly as I have. So a big shout out goes out to them, and especially the top tier backers who are scrolling across the screen right now. If you'd like to consider backing the show yourself, please visit patreon.com/TheGamingBritShow. Cheers and peace out. I also don't remember having to accept a privacy policy when playing the original. 80-minute analysis coming soon. No, I'm just kidding.